Welcome to the Rant Live. Welcome to the Rant, everybody. Thursday, August 9th in 2021, the year of the Cubs.
I think it's August 5th.
August 5th at 9:37.
Did we?
Sometimes I get
I was like, "Holy shit, what happened?"
Sometimes I get the date and the time mixed up. I blame Tom Ricketts for that. Really?
Well, here's the thing. He might not be paying for players, but he might still have enough money to fast forward time. I'm not sure, or maybe he's got enough money to grease the wheels in the city council to make some other things happen,
like a casino or a sports book or something like that.
Wonderful timing. Like you noted this in the piece that you wrote earlier, but just the optics, and not that they've ever cared about that. But I think when in all my criticism of the business side of things, right? And it's funny because when you criticize these things, I criticized Jed Hoyer, and I wrote this on the airplane, by the way. So I don't know, how many people frequently fly and use airline Wi-Fi.
It's not good.
But it's not great. And I don't know how many of you operate blogs, but I wrote 1,300 by God words on my phone on a flight. So, I'm not saying
that's commitment.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm like, that's kind of legit, right? And I had to kill some time. And I think that was, I don't remember if that was my flight, probably from Seattle to Dallas. But anyway, the bigger moral of the story is that I was criticizing what Jed Hoyer said and the way he said it when he essentially threw those players under the bus. And all these people react like, "Whoa, you just wanted to keep all the players." I'm like, yeah, I mean, I would love for them to spend all their money and keep everybody. The point of that post, though, was that the way Hoyer said those things was not helpful and was actually harmful, not only in regards to the legacies of those players, but the free agency in general. But it's just so funny, though, people will jump out and criticize. So I'm setting this up for a bigger point, which is that if we criticize things on here, understand that not everything we do is going to be binary. It's not like John is saying this is black and white, and I'm saying no, it's purple and red. I don't know. It's not these, like, things can be divided. There's gray in between. We don't have to climb up on a hill and offer to die on it and fight everybody who wants to argue with you. Like, folks, it's okay. Like,
if we did that, we'd be spending all our time doing that. Just FYI,
right, you can believe no Tom Ricketts is a shitbag and also believe that the Cubs needed to trade some guys, or you can say I wanted them to keep at least two of these players, but I also hate the way the offense was trending and I wanted them to move in a different direction. You can believe two different things. I promise you, folks, you will not wither and die if you actually accept bigger context beyond what is immediate that you react to. I promise you. I swear. Buddy, the Kaufman guy who keeps replying to me, who I'm going to block pretty soon from the website or actual site comments, not even Facebook.
Oh yeah.
Like some dummy. But
yeah.
Anyway, what I guess what I'm saying is that you can be pissed off about the sports book, right? And I know it's not necessarily the same pool of money, but you can be pissed off about them cutting money from the player payroll and then turning around and adding this new addition. You can be pissed about them adding this to Wrigley Field after getting the National Historic Landmark designation that now nets them massive tax proceeds,
$75 million.
That they said, that Tom Ricketts specifically said, those tax breaks will not go into player payroll. And yet here you are adding a 23,000 square foot sports book onto Wrigley Field. I don't care, right? And you're an accounting guy. You're a finance guy. You know that this money can be moved around differently and that these things don't come out of the same buckets. And I get it. It's just a terrible, this finally gets back to my original point that I made like half an hour ago, is that this team consistently, from a business operations standpoint, has just continued to set up flaming piles of dog shit at every Wrigley Field entrance and then stepping in it themselves every time. They just cannot manage not to trip over their own dicks. And I know now that's like two really bad analogies that I've mixed in there together. They just keep doing it. It's like, I mean, at this point, you have to wonder, Are they ignorant and they just have no idea what the hell they're doing, or do they just seriously not give a shit what people think about what they're doing?
Well, let's be
it
fair.
feels like the latter.
Tom Ricketts cared a lot when he first bought the team because he needed to do everything that he's done in order to acquire all the property around Wrigley to be able to turn it into what I refer to as Disney World. And good old Scrooge McRicketts now, as I believe he's known, doesn't want to spend any money on the baseball team anymore because he has gotten everything that he's wanted. And now he continues to kind of push the agenda to get more of what he wants, which is to increase his net worth and the net worth of his family. And today, it's a real good time to be angry about the way Tom Ricketts goes about running the Chicago Cubs until, and so you've got a caveat there is he going to do what it takes? Is he going to provide? He's provided the lip service because he has just a few days ago talked about how this isn't a rebuild, this is a reset. And I mean, listen, you can follow the logic of that conversation and that thought because the Cubs right now, their farm system, their minor league system is substantially better than it was when Ricketts first purchased the team. That is a fact. But it just remains to be seen kind of what happens with it. And so I don't know.
Oh, there it is. Sorry, there it is. There's the comment. Top 5 payroll. I'm not. We've addressed it.
But so yeah, this is so the Cubs are committed to $50 million for next year, and that's out of a.
And they're down $40 million this year over last year. They got rid of Yu Darvish. The 2018 season was the last one in which they meaningfully spent. The payroll has been high because they inflated it early with long-term contracts that have since continued to wear out. However, they have not meaningfully added to it, and that is the whole point of not spending. It's the idea that they did not have the off-season budget to make the kind of moves that would have been needed to remake the roster. That's the whole idea.
And so when we talk about next year, because we have a comment that talks about next year, and obviously you have to talk about next year, there's a couple big things. The biggest thing is the CBA. We don't know what's going to end up happening to the CBA. And so you can argue that the position the Cubs are in and the flexibility that they currently have right now, they're in probably about the best position you could possibly be in for a big market team going into an uncertain CBA negotiation and not knowing what the CBA is going to look like on the other side of that. So you can very easily kind of get yourself to a point where being where the Cubs are right now makes perfect sense. It's really what happens after that. I personally do not believe that the Cubs are going to add any big name free agents. Don't look for them to sign Chris Bryant, Javi Baez, or Anthony Rizzo. I'd be very surprised if they did.
Not after what Jed said.
yeah. After Jed gave him the middle finger. Hey, we didn't want those guys around here anyways, but they're legends. And so what I think will happen is the Cubs will go in with a very similar team to what we see right now. You'll probably see some more prospects up in Chicago. And to the extent that if they were to be in a position to be close to, a few games out of the lead in the NL Central at the trade deadline next year, which I think is highly unlikely, I think they'd add. But I really think that you're going to be looking to add at the end of next year, meaning prior to 2023, because that's when you'd probably have these prospects fairly well developed with some good major league level experience at that point. And there's a lot of great prospects in the system that by 2023 can be real good. I mean, Brendan Davis is at the top of the list, obviously offensively, but there's some really good pitching prospects in the system too, not to mention the guys that they just got via trades, which again, if you look at what happened, I know it sucks. My kids were crushed. They were both crying. I'm trying to type out posts as they're coming in the room reading them, crying. Chris Bryant got traded and Anthony Rizzo, and now my son's a Yankees fan. Great. Thanks, Tom Ricketts. But I think at the end of the day, it was either do what they did or lose those guys because they weren't re-signing them. And who knows if the qualifying offer is going to be part of the next CBA. And so it's a complex situation, particularly because the CBA expires at the end of this year. I think if it didn't expire, it might be a little bit easier to navigate or understand and to see a path forward. But right now, that's a big uncertainty. And so, it's It sucked, but it had to be done. I think the biggest question that you have to ask yourself is how did the Cubs get here? Why did it have to be done?
Yeah, and I want to point this out, right? Because what one of our viewers, listeners has been pointing out, and somewhat erroneously, and this kind of goes back to my point earlier about when people take at face value when the Cubs say, because this is a common refrain from Tom Ricketts and from Green Kennedy, well, we've been in the top X payroll for the last however long. Right. The point is not that they have never spent money. Not even that they won't spend money, because they might. I mean, in some sense, they're going to have to spend some money, because as of now, outside of arbitration eligible players, they have and rookie contracts, they have 3 players under contract for next year: Kyle Hendricks, David Bodie, Jason Hayward. Those are the only 3 long-term guaranteed contracts that they possess on the books at this point. So they will have to add someone just to be able to have it. But and as was noted here, we're stuck with Hayward because who the hell is going to take it?
Listen, Google Jason Hayward. Contract. We're tired of explaining the Jason Hayward situation.
He is under contract. You cannot trade him because, first of all, nobody wants him. Second of all, he's got full no trade rights as part of his 10-5, full no trade exemption as part of his 10-5 rights, so he can block anything. Come on, greedy agents. No. Stop. Anyway, the point, again, they did have a high payroll. Yes. But here's the thing. You cannot go buy a Lamborghini. I mean, you can do this. You can't go buy a Lamborghini and then not be able to afford the maintenance on it. You can't go buy $1 million home and then not be able to afford the property taxes. If you are going to spend like the big boys, you've got to be able and willing to go into that luxury tax and understand that, like, baseball is not guaranteed. No sport is, nothing in life is. So if you truly want to maintain that competitiveness, you've got to do one of 2 things. You either had to have had a better farm system or keep that built up the whole time. Again, some of this fault is on Theo and Jed. That totally goes there. I'm not putting this all on Ricketts. But you've also got to be able to spend that additional money. And all the free money has been going into, and not even free money because they've been leveraging it with loans and so forth, right? They've got a huge debt load. So they've been buying up all these buildings, and that's really where the focus has been. But here's the issue, and as one of our readers pointed out here, watchers pointed out, and maybe, I don't know if you saw this or not, but if you did, you can cheat. What is the only multi-year contract they've given to a position player since Jason Hayward?
All right, you're asking me.
I'm asking you.
The only multi-year deal they gave to a position player. Who was that? That's a good question. Is it Daniel Descalso?
It is Daniel Descalso. Now, what is the largest contract they've given out for a position player since Jason Hayward?
Position player. Oh my God. Honestly, I can't really think of
Kyle, Bodie was an extension.
Oh, Bodie,
that's
okay.
An extension. No. I'm talking about free agency.
Free agent. Was it Carlos? Whatever his name was.
Nope. Let's see. John Jay got $9 million.
Okay.
And then our buddy Jock Peterson with his 7.
Jock. Okay.
Was.
Yeah.
So, but actually, it wasn't. It was. Jay was after Hayward, wasn't he? Anyway. So when we talk about not spending money, that's the point, is that you have, right, Rob, you're missing the point entirely. If the Lamborghini breaks down, no, the point is that if you are buying the Lamborghini, you don't get to go, you can't just try a new model. If it's broken down, you have to fix it. That's the way it works. You fix it. You don't just get to sit there with a Lamborghini in your driveway. You don't put it up on blocks and sell off the tires. That's not the way it works, unless you're, Lance Briggs, and then you do leave it under the embankment after you run it in there late at night and then leave the scene. But the idea here is that when you are playing in the big boy market, you have to spend on top of that. And if there is a need to dial those things back, you can't do it as harshly as what the Cubs have done. Again, they are last year's payroll. Now, granted, they only had to pay out 36% of it because of the COVID stuff. Last year's payroll was set to be about $199 million. The year before that was like 222. So it dropped about 23 million. This year, 159. They dropped another 40 million. So when you say they're spending, look at where the payroll is. No, that's like going into Kohl's and it's like, save 40%. I'm not saving 40% off of shit. I was never going to pay the full price on that anyway. I'm paying the price you're telling me. You just jacked up. You didn't actually mark it down. You actually marked up what the price could have been to make me feel like I'm saving money. So when they say we're spending all this money, yes, it's up there, but it's lower than what it was. So the point here, again, they could have made better additions. They made some very poor additions. The front office made some poor choices with the money that they had. That's absolutely the way it worked. But at the same time, they've also been given, and here's the other kicker, is that the goalposts have been moved in terms of the money that they said they were going to have. You know, they believed they were going to have bigger budgets than what ended up being the case. And whether that's
and that's where you look at Ricketts, right?
Yeah,
but that's also, you know, he's got the pandemic to lean on, which didn't seem to impact any other team except the Chicago Cubs for some reason. And so, you know, I think it's really easy to be mad. The problem is that you have a real hard time pinning down who to be mad at. I mean, there's no question that Theo has shown he has a complete and utter inability to build a repeat winner. He's never been able to do that. He can come in and he can build a winner. The problem is he just can't. He's never been able to build a repeatable process, and that's the thing that's really frustrating. And you look at some of the moves, the Jose Quintana trade, and some of the other moves that he made.
Oof,
he made some great.
Keeps looking bad, but anyway.
Yeah, he made some great moves. But yeah, the Quintana trade's terrible. But you know, for a like a number 3 pitcher, basically, and so it's some of the things. But again, you know, he signed Craig Kimbrell, and he was just flipped for 2 really good, basically big league players, and so. You know, you could say there's a lot of things. It's Ricketts, it's a pandemic, it's just kind of a snowball effect, and kind of we are where we are. I think the best thing and the only thing we can really do at this point is look forward. The Cubs have a great number of prospects. Their Fangraphs, I think, had them ranked now as the 8th best system in Major League Baseball, and that's saying something. I mean, that's just after the trades. That's without a full minor league season and any time for these kids to develop. So I think once you give it a little bit of time to develop, you know, I mean, next year that could be a top 5 system the Cubs have, and then they're going to work in their the guys that they just recently signed, and so there's a lot of hope, I think, out there. But the thing is that what's frustrating is you look at a team like the Dodgers and the Yankees and you know, the big market teams that are able to do this the right way, and for some reason are always able to spend and are always able to make the trades and always able to get the big name free agents. I mean, that's what's frustrating as a Cubs fan is like why the Dodgers have been at the top of their game for the past 10 years. The entire time the Cubs should have been there.
Yeah, and when you say the Cubs are top 3 payroll, well, who else is up there? The Dodgers are consistently up there, and the Dodgers are also like. Every week, they're just calling up a new top prospect who comes up and either rakes or just shoves as a pitcher or hitter. Like they have a very deep system. Now here's the thing, you know, because people are like, Cubs need to be more like no, the Cubs need to be the Dodgers, right? The Cubs need to be the Red Sox, the Yankees, or someone. Now the Red Sox, again, as you mentioned, that's really the model, especially if we tie it back to Theo Epstein, to where, you know, they won and then they kind of had a really crappy season and totally missed the playoffs, but then they came back and they won a World Series again, and they kind of. They've had some lulls, but they've had some very big highs. So when you win, you know, 3 World Series in that time and a couple in fairly short succession there, if you're doing it right, you can spend money and develop your farm system. I mean, that's what the Dodgers have been doing, and they're very, very smart about it. They will make, like, they made that massive trade with the Dodgers, remember, or with the Red Sox. Remember, the Red Sox made all those awful signings. They picked up Adrian Gonzalez and Carl Crawford and did all that stuff, and then they flipped that because they let that money all expire off the books. Then they took on all this bad stuff, and they got a bunch of prospects with those guys, you know, just to accept and eat those bad contracts. But the Red Sox did that. They were able to kind of open up their books. So, I mean, the Cubs can do some things like that. And I think the hope that everyone has is that they will do that. Now, the problem is, you know, they got rid of 3 kind of iconic players to do it, and it's difficult. Again, the problem is that the quick fix that they had initially was get those top draft picks. They got very lucky that they all developed very, very quickly in the manner that they did. And they were able to do that, but then they never, ever developed pitching. They spent like a decade of just awful pitching development in the minors. I mean, just you could almost throw darts blindly and hit the bullseye more frequently than Theo Epstein and Jed Hoyer and their development crew were able to do with the pitching staff. It is an abject failure, especially when you see what else is going on out there, and how they managed to miss the boat on that so tremendously is still beyond me, and that's still a source of frustration for people. So
yeah,
that's got nothing to do with Ricketts. That's absolutely on the front office and on the baseball staff, absolutely. But when you look at things like, if we talk about where the money comes in, right? And again, you can feel free to disagree with some of these or not. But you look at, they didn't have the money to go and acquire Justin Verlander at the trade deadline a couple years ago. Justin Verlander wanted to come to Chicago. That was his choice. He wanted to be there. Bryce Harper wanted to be in Chicago. I understand that's a totally
those were the days.
deal.
Remember when,
right?
when players actually wanted to come play? Until Jed Hoyer was like,
I know a lot of people
like,
oh, we don't want that guy anyway. He sucks. Okay, cool. You can hate Bryce Harper. What I'm saying is that the money wasn't there for that. They did not have the money to offer a deal to Nicholas Castellanos. This actually is Nick now, Nick Castellanos, who might opt out of it because he had an opt out after last year and after this year with the Reds. That's a guy they could maybe target if they feel like doing that. But there are multiple players who have wanted to either come to or remain in Chicago with the Cubs, including the 3 players who were just traded. Multiple, and the money was not there. So when we say Tom Ricketts doesn't want to spend, that's what it goes to. And again, I'm not saying he should have a $600 million payroll, right? Let's be smart about the way we're saying this. I am simply saying that the money wasn't there for these. Harper is kind of his own different animal there. Verlander would have made more sense. They could have made some things work there. There were ways probably early on that they could have found a way to unload Jason Hayward and eat a bunch of his deal and just move him for whatever. They could have probably done something to try to acquire Eric Hosmer, right out there. San Diego's trying to get rid of
that. Might still be. Well, is he terming out this year? Does his contract end this year?
He's still on for like 3 more years.
So that's
there might be something they could do in the offseason if they're willing to. But and that would be, again, people are like, why'd you pay that dead money? It's like, because you'll get prospects back and because you only have $50 million on the books. So who gives a shit? Even if you have to eat it completely. But those are the things that I point to. And I think the Castellanos one that's still a source of frustration, right? 2+ years later or whatever it is now, that guy came in and he was like, I love it. This is awesome. And okay, Rob, stop it. No, we do not all know Bryant was going to free agency no matter what. That is wrong. I don't know how many times I got to address that. Stop. That's just not true. They did not offer him. And here's the thing, okay? We'll get this out there. I do not believe for a second, at least not fully, Jed Hoyer saying we offered them all very good deals that'll stand up well in light of free agency. Because then Anthony Rizzo came back and he's like, there's a common denominator to why we're all gone. Right? I mean, these guys talk. They know what's going on.
That was just kind of, that really felt like that was more of just a response to, Hoyer's comments.
Do not always go to free agency. Stop it. Stop. I'm sorry. I'm yelling at our comments. Boris clients do not always go to free agency. It's wrong. It doesn't. It's stop it. It's a bad narrative. Do they mostly? Yes, but a lot of players go to free agency. Not everybody signs.
What's this guy? John Shway Fargus? Is that his name?
Janeshwi.
Janeshwi. Okay, so he's in the lineup today. I'm working on the lineup.
Okay. You have I have a draft, right? You're working off the draft?
I am working off the draft.
Okay, good.
See, you guys are behind the scenes.
I only have my phone. But yeah, the idea though is that there have been so many players along the lines that wanted to be here. And that's part of what I go back to with Hoyer as well, is like what we saw when they built this thing, right? Like and again, people don't like to talk about Hayward and he's making too much money, but he actually was offered more money by the Cardinals and the Nationals. Ben Zobrist could have gotten more money. John Lackey could have gotten more money. People wanted to come to Chicago to play for the Cubs. They took less money to do it. And that was the thing. But then as you watch a lot of these guys who have come in and now the money hasn't been there for them, not they wanted. And now Jed's sitting there like basically saying, we expected them to take less. I mean, he pretty much said as much. Like we offered them, and it might as well have just said we offered them hometown discount type deals that were team friendly, and they didn't want them. And now I'm mad about that. But I'm like, you can't just expect that to continue. especially if you come out and say stuff like that. Like, that's just the tough part to me. I gotta adjust my chair here. About how he came out and said that, because it doesn't just, it's not kind of spitting in the face of the guys who left. To me, having your president and acting GM say that is kind of a red flag for free agents who might be coming in there. Like, are these guys willing to pay me market value? Are they willing to bring me in and give me, or are they going to expect me to take less money to be a part of this team? And I think that's where there's a big difference between Jed Hoyer and Theo Epstein. I can't tell if Jed is too transparent in what he's saying, or as Tom says here, Hoyer doesn't communicate as well as Theo Epstein did. I don't think he does a very good
job. He's not
job
as diplomatic, you know. He just doesn't.
Yeah,
like there's a certain, when you deal with executives, you get the sense that they have the ability to communicate things that, you know, most people can't communicate without emotion. And so Theo was really good at I can't ever remember seeing Theo show any emotion except for, you know, when the Cubs won the World Series. Like, he was really good at doing that. And I just think that, you know, maybe Jed Hoyer just isn't as good as doing that. He obviously has something he needs to learn, which you think he would have learned in the years that he was under Theo Epstein. But and if he hasn't learned it now, I you know, it's hard to think he's going to be able to kind of learn that. But and that's just, he's just the diplomacy just kind of really wasn't there. And then he kind of came out and backtracked. And so it's just like the Jed Hoyer era has not started off nearly as smoothly as the Theo Epstein era started off. I mean, that didn't even really start off that smoothly, but you had faith in Theo because you knew what he did and you knew what he was going to do. With Jed, it's just kind of like this unknown, and now everyone's just been traded away, and Jed can't, you know, just wants to put his foot in his mouth, and then Tom's trying to cover for it. And I can only imagine like the conversation that happened between Tom Ricketts and Jed Hoyer after Jed made those comments. I assume the door was probably closed, but you know, it's just, it's tough. And so you're right. When you've got free agents that are looking to come to a team, listen, the thing is that Wrigley Field is always going to be Wrigley Field. Chicago is always going to be Chicago. Where Wrigley Field is located, the neighborhood that it's in, the coolness and the awesomeness of Chicago as a city, the people and how they adore their baseball players, none of that's going to change. And so at the end of the day, and that's why you've always had Chicago as a popular place, even back when the Tribune owned the Cubs, you know, so. But off to a little bit of a bumpy start, like just like me editing this or doing the lineup, little bumpy.
Yeah, I mean, it's there's a lot going on, and I think that's what people kind of fail to recognize sometimes is when we're saying, you know, spend money. It depends on who's the right fit, right? And I think we even saw there's sometimes where you just kind of get lucky and you bring somebody in like a Matt Duffy, who again has seemed like a really good fit. Patrick Wisdom has been a really good one to bring on. You know, they might have their closer of the future in Manny Rodriguez, who came up and got the save last night, throwing 100-mile-an-hour gas, you know, coming up through the system. So there are things to look forward to. The issue for me continues to be one of imbalance. Right. So they spent really big on pitching because they had all these hitting prospects come up. And then they never developed their own pitching. So that imbalance remained. And so that when those hitters were getting paid a bunch more money, whether it be through arbitration or just the potential for extensions, the money was not there because so much of it was going into pitching, even when they're paying some of those guys to not even pitch for them anymore. And they never really went in and found those guys outside. We talk about those core pieces. You're like, well, those guys suck. Well, a lineup has 8 people, 9, you know, if you're in the American League, 8 and a hitter or 8 and a pitcher. You need to have better balance. So say it's, you know, those top 3 guys with Javi and Rizzo and Bryant, who are your, you know, 2 of your top 5 or 3 of your top 5 hitters in any given lineup. If you don't have, I mean, they have not had a consistently competent leadoff hitter, and Lord knows how long. And everybody laments Chris Bryant's RBI totals. It's like, well, he's had crap in front of him for the most part. They haven't had that solid balance throughout the lineup. So sometimes you need to go out there and spend a little bit. And I'm not talking about $100 million even. but find a couple of those guys who can competently fill a position on an everyday basis and be that contact bat to kind of offset. It's that Ben Zobrist who just kind of held things together and was that solid lineup guy, batting there at the top, or he could even come in fifth, sixth if you needed to and play all over. They haven't had someone like that. And you can't just go find those guys on trees, but those players exist. Castellanos was a great addition to that ball club. Again, I keep going back to that, but I look at him, and I'm not even saying his production, which certainly has gotten even better, certainly since he got out of Detroit, which we had projected it would when he was with the Cubs. He's been great in Cincinnati, but more than that, it's the style and the attitude that he brought and everything else. It's really one of those things. Yeah, Dexter Fowler's been bad. They should not have re-signed Dexter Fowler. That was
and the thing with Castellanos, anyways, is like, listen, he was a fan favorite and everybody wanted him to be re-signed, but at the end of the day, it just wasn't the right time for a guy like Castellanos. The Cubs really needed pitching. Oh, what the heck, Yu Darvish? So then they traded him. And listen, I stick to the philosophy that I think what the Cubs did is that was the Yu Darvish trade, I believe, was made by Tom Ricketts and Jed Hoyer so that it could be a catalyst to what we saw at the trade deadline. Because if the Cubs got to a position in this season at the trade deadline where they were in the lead in the NL Central and they had Yu Darvish on their staff, and you look at their staff before the season, you could clearly say they would, if they were in the position to be in the lead, they would need to add a pitcher to have a realistic opportunity to be able to really compete in the playoffs. But if they were in the lead at the trade deadline, but they didn't have Yu Darvish, you could look at that and know there'd just be no way that the Cubs were going to be competitive. And so you could have still justified a teardown of this team simply based off the fact that the Cubs just didn't have an ace. And whatever you think Kyle Hendricks is, he's a number 3 in the playoffs. Maybe he can perform as a number 1, but you can't bank on that. And you're certainly not going to win a series with Yu Darvish and Kyle Hendricks. I mean, I don't think and then a bevy of other guys. What you need is Yu Darvish, Max Scherzer, and Kyle Hendricks. That wins you a series. That wins you the World Series. And so that's what they would have had to have done. If they had Yu Darvish and they were in first place, that's what would have been expected. And then it would have turned out and all these players would have been gone anyways. And they would have been stuck with Max Scherzer. And so it's just like, I understand why they made the Yu Darvish trade. And I understand why it seemed at the time like it was a desperation move, because I think the justification and the line of thinking was, we can't go into the season and have a winning record at the trade deadline with Yu Darvish and expect to be able to dump these guys who were never going to be able to resign. Yeah,
I mean, they took out basically what they did. They knew they had to renovate, and they knocked out a supporting wall and then just kind of let the house collapse in on itself is really what ended up happening.
Yeah, they accidentally knocked down the supporting wall. Whoa, we didn't know that was going to happen. Weird.
Didn't realize it was a load-bearing wall there. Well, guess we got to tear it down. Damn it. Hey, check on the insurance claim there, Crane. But
hey, look, we're insured. Sweet.
Yeah. And that is what they did. And I wrote at the time, I said, because we knew he was about it, I said, if he gets traded, and I think I said they're not punting on 21, they're punting on at least the next 2 years. Definitely. Is what I had said at the time. Now, again, I am willing to believe that there's a possibility that they spend big in free agency. I'm willing to believe, because that is, in theory, that's an option that exists. As you mentioned, though, with the unknowns of the CBA and with most of their top prospects not really being able to come up, because really what you want is not to have a team full of your prospects that come up. You want to have those big name proven players around whom you can put prospects to kind of have that team build up together, right? That's what signing John Lester was part of, and then bringing in Jason Hayward, because like it or not, he was a part of that World Series team, right? They built that, and bringing in Ben Zobrist and John Lackey. Like you go and spend big money on free agents and then allow your prospects to fill in those other spots, right? You find free agents who fit around the guys you're going to be calling up. And knowing that, hey, could Brennan Davis be up next year? Probably, but is he really ready for that on an everyday basis? Kind of doubtful, but you could spend a little bit this year as long as you can get some guys you think. But I really think that it's after next year that they would look to make that move. So you look at maybe a down year, you kind of let things settle, make sure the CBA gets all cleared out, you get your bearings, you make sure the casino, make sure the sports book is turning out mad cash for you, and then you can get going.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think next year is going to be exciting. And you talked about Manny Rodriguez. So Manny Rodriguez was signed as an international free agent signing back in 2017 at the age of 20. He's got, an upper 90s sinker, an upper 90s four-seam fastball, and then a upper 80s slider. And I'm excited just watching him. I mean, obviously you got Patrick Wisdom. Wisdom's a little old, right? And you can't really think that Wisdom's going to be the future of the Chicago Cubs. But when you start looking at some young pitchers and even Hoyer, who's come in and looked pretty decent, and knowing Nick Madrigal's there and he's going to be a good addition to the Cubs, and at least, hey, the Cubs finally have a leadoff hitter. They don't have anybody behind him, but boy, they've got a leadoff hitter now.
Well, and they will have absolutely zero power in the middle of the field between Madrigal and Horner.
It's like, is that an overcorrect, you think? I mean, it's like,
well, I wrote about that.
Feels like it.
It is an overcorrect, and like trading for Pete Crow Thompson, who's out with the shoulder, like he's a big time contact guy without a lot of pop. Who's a Dykeman or whoever they got. He's got a little bit of pop, but not, and you need some of that. But there again, it's that imbalance that I feel like, anytime you have to deal with that, right? It's just like anything else. The pendulum goes one way and it's going to swing back the other. And so I'm kind of I think Madrigal, to use one of my big words, is a perfectly cromulent player. He's just fine, but it is a bit concerning, and maybe it's just because we've been used to Javi in the middle of the diamond. But after, everybody's like, oh crap, Horner's got more pop than we thought. He hit 3 home runs when he got called up in 19, and then he didn't hit any last year, and he hasn't hit any this year. And hey, that's your contact bat. Like, you have that, and then you've got Matt. But if you don't have, and I know that, hey, Patrick Wisdom, cool, possible rookie of the year candidate, and we hope that
at 30
isn't just hope that just isn't a flash in the pan. But then who's at first base, right? Is that do you have some of these guys come up? Is that Alfonso Rivas? Is he able to come up? But he doesn't have the kind of pop that Rizzo did, and so we've seen it. I know a lot of people are like, the Cubs need to stop being homer dependent. It's one thing to not be dependent upon the homer. It's another thing entirely to be solely dependent on contact baseball. So it's interesting.
And
there's a lot going on.
What it feels like they're doing, at least, is they're building. They saw that. I mean, and if you look at, so the Cubs haven't won a playoff game since 2017. And if you look at what their biggest downfall was, they didn't have the contact bats. They had the power bats, and the power bats would go cold, and they wouldn't get runs, and they'd score 14 runs, and then they'd score 0 and 1, and so that was an ongoing issue for the last several years. So that's obvious. What they're trying to do is they're trying to say, all right, well, let's retool. Let's get these good contact guys in, and then we can sign the big bats via free agency. And so I would think that's what that's what they would look to do. You don't need that many big bats to really make an impact and drive a team. And in fact, it more than not comes down to the pitching, right? I mean, like, if you've got, like, the Brewers, I expect the Brewers to go to the World Series because their pitching is just unbelievable. If you've got 3 solid starting pitchers, you can look through the history of the playoffs. I mean, any team that comes in with that setup usually does really well, usually ends up going to the World Series. You've got to obviously add to that, power hitting and contact hitting and stuff, because you're facing good pitching as well. But at the end of the day, I think there was just an overemphasis placed by Theo Epstein and his team on the power bats. And it just that's the way it worked out when they drafted these guys and developed them. And it was kind of the Achilles heel of the team, which is a weird thing to think power would be an Achilles heel.
And Schwarber never developed the hit tool that they thought he would. He really did not turn into anything other than a slugger. They really did think he was going to be that, not to say that he was going to bat 300 necessarily, but well up into the high 200s, right? I mean, they thought he would be, this really solid hitter who could also slug, and instead he turned into a masher who struck out way too often and never looked at a looking third strike that he didn't like. But it'll be interesting again to see how it all plays out. But I think a few people are in here saying it, and I just think you don't go from where the Cubs are and have been recently to immediately being into contention, particularly as we noted how many players they have who are no longer under contract, who are not guaranteed anything beyond this year. You don't really do that overnight unless you go out and just spend huge and completely remake the roster. I don't think they're going to do that. I do think they probably go out there and find some guys who maybe I'll call transitional players who are willing to do maybe 2 or 3 years, kind of be that guy who maybe is going to get a shot in a major market. Not a ton of money, but hey, you're going to be a starter for, at least next year. And then, maybe you ride out your career here. I do think it's after next year that they would actually make their move. Really doesn't seem like one of those things to me that they're going to go huge after somebody, but they could. And if they do go big, it's going to have to be on somebody that they can manage to get who's young enough that they look at it and say, we think you've still got a good, after next year, 4 to 5 years of your prime that we can build off of you in that window. So, I mean, at that point, you're talking about a guy, they're not going big on anybody who's already hit 30. You know what I mean? Because at that point, you're basically buying his post-prime years for a time when you want to be at your most competitive. That doesn't make any sense. So, there were rumors. The other thing that was interesting, though, there were rumors that they had discussed trading Chris Bryant to Tampa for Tyler Glasnow, who is now getting Tommy John surgery. Will be out. But again, so think about what that tells you about the timeline. They're not interested in competing next year. If you're trading for Tyler Glasnow, he's out all of next year. So you don't care about that. So now you're talking 23 is really what you're aiming at. And to me, the fact that they were talking about that, how meaningful those things got or not, I really think those things that's what we're looking at is next year is going to be that transition period. I don't think we're talking full on tank like we saw before, because they, in order to do that, they need like 2 or 3 years of really high draft picks and everything. But I do think you see them kind of, hey, we're not going for it. We're going to fill out the roster with whatever we need. And then, hey, it's 23 once we get some of these guys all up and ready that we think we're good. But that's where I'd peg it right now.
Yeah. And I've enjoyed watching. I mean, when the Cubs gave up 13 runs, was it that yesterday? That was a little tough to continue to watch. But I typically, just generally speaking, I've enjoyed watching the games because we get to see guys that are young, and it's not as frustrating. I mean, like when Javi and Chris and everybody before the trade deadline were playing, I mean, we expected them to win games. At this point, I think you kind of are feeling good if they get some wins. But more than anything, I just want to see kind of, how these players are adjusting to the major leagues, who's being called up. To me, it's a more interesting time than it was before the trade deadline, just because you get a look at the future. And so I think even next year is going to be really interesting just to watch these prospects come up and just to kind of see what happens and to see, are they really going to get to a point where they add enough to the payroll and they get back up to a major market payroll over $200 million, which is exactly where they should be. I understand, again, the financial flexibility that they built for themselves going into an uncertain offseason with the CBA expiring. So that's fine. But what happens once the CBA gets finalized after next year, I think you're really not going to be able to judge anything until after next season. So just kind of buckle in and,
Yeah. I mean, if nothing else, it's not as frustrating because they're not very good and they're not supposed to be good. So, and I'm not saying like it's enjoyable that they, but honestly, if there's a time when you forgot the game was on in the afternoon and you kind of tune into it in the 6th inning and they're losing, or you forgot about it entirely, or you're watching on a Friday night and they get behind early and you're just like, screw it, I'm going to go watch a movie. Like, you can do that much more easily and kind of detach yourself from it and just kind of be like, you know what? They don't have all this. They're not supposed to be good right now. We already know what's happening with this season and cool. And so there is part of that that's, I don't want to say that makes it doesn't make it more enjoyable. It just makes it less painful or less frustrating, I think, is really which again is more enjoyable than being, frustrating and
having high expectations.
Yeah. So I mean, it removes some of that pressure. I certainly feel that way from our end. And it does allow you to kind of shift the focus a little bit to the minors and to see who some of these guys are coming up. And, as much as we might not like some of the decisions that were made and you don't like watching Anthony Rizzo hit 3 home runs in his first 6 games with the Yankees and drive in a run in each of those, that sucks. But at the same time, what's done is done. And at least we know it's there versus sitting there every day, like with the trade deadline hanging over everybody's head and wondering what's going to happen. So,
yeah. And I think this is an appropriate time where we should plug our minor league coverage on Cubs Insider. So we're fortunate to have a great minor league team led by Greg Huss, Todd Johnson. Is it Greg Zumack? Jimmy Nelligan. We have a really great staff of minor league guys. We've got the Growing Cubs podcast in addition to this podcast that's carried on CubsInsider.com. And so the good part about where we are now is that we have the ability to really cover in depth the minor league system. And these guys have been following the system and for a while. And Growing Cubs is over a year old, I think, right? Is it 2 years?
Well over. Yeah. So
it's been going for a while. So definitely check out Growing Cubs podcast in addition to this podcast and webcast. And be on the lookout for some of that minor league content coming out. And it's just, I love reading it because it's just a great way to learn about what's happening in the system. And like I said, that's more exciting than
really
losing.
Love that too. I mean, that's specifically what those guys came to us to do. It wasn't like, hey, you like the Cubs, go try to do this. It was like, hey, can we do this? Do you guys, are you cool with if I write for you about this? And that's kind of where it came from, because that's where their passion lies. And you can tell it when you read about that stuff. So if you do want to know what's coming up, obviously we have a ton of that. But I would also ask, for those of you who are out there, if you're obviously a lot of you are viewing right now, we can see you on here. If you are listening to this in a podcast form, if you could just, especially if it's on iTunes or whatever service you cast your pods from, if you could leave us a nice little 5-star review. Even if you got to lie a little bit, if you really only think it's 4, we'd really appreciate you just fudging a little bit and give us a 5.
We had one guy who was very upset about our, I don't know if you read on the Apple podcast, we got a very bad 1-star review because we probably didn't like Eric Sogard, but he's gone now. And so it doesn't matter.
Well, that's good. It's always funny when people disagree with something and they rate your deal down for that. But anyway,
just for that.
If you could make up for that guy's foolish rating, we would really appreciate it. It helps us in that regard because, as you know, this is free. We don't have ads. We're not getting paid to do this. So your 5-star reviews are the only things that we actually get paid in. And
that's it. Your love.
And we love
get
them.
Paid in your love.
Worth. Yeah, they are worth so much.
So the Cubs, speaking of love or maybe no love, they've got a series this weekend at Wrigley against the White Sox and then 4 against the Brewers. I mean, this has just murder, death, everything bad possibly written all over it. I mean, my expectation is a 7-game losing streak. Hard to imagine the Cubs winning 1 game against either of these teams, to be quite honest with you. And which means they'll probably sweep the White Sox. I don't know, but it's going to be interesting if the Cubs come out and can actually win the first game of the White Sox series. And it's just there's going to be a lot of banter back and forth between the White Sox and the Cubs because the White Sox are coming in so loaded. I mean, that team is just ridiculously good. I hate to say it, but it's true. And when you look at like what we talked about, what Ricketts has done around Wrigley Field and kind of how it's all built up and it's like all nice and everything now, if you ever want to kind of harken back to the old days and the kind of the crappiness of that a lot of people appreciated, myself included, just head on down to the South Side because it's still just as crappy as ever down there. But their baseball team is amazing. So it's going to be an interesting weekend in Chicago.
We'll see. I'm I got a family event going on, and my brother-in-law is a big White Sox fan, so I'm sure we'll be taking into games and seeing what happens there. But like I said, at least if nothing else, it's great. There's a little bit of bragging rights, but the Cubs suck, and they're not really trying. So like I just don't put much into it, which is actually, again, as I mentioned before, it's somewhat more enjoyable for me because I can just kind of chill and no big deal.
Which is what would make the Cubs beating the White Sox that much better, because the Cubs and Cubs fans really don't care about the series, but you can guarantee yourself that every single White Sox fan is all hyped up. They're coming into this series thinking we're just going to kill the Cubs. Finally, we're just going to kill them. And if they don't win that first game, it's really going to make for an interesting next 2 games. So a little bit of chaos is good, right?
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see.
So yeah, we'll see. I mean, I don't think there's any much. There's probably not much of a need to preview who's going to pitch and whatever. I think Arrieta is probably going to be in their game, so that's a crapshoot at best. And
he's pitching. He's pitching today, so he won't be.
Oh yeah. Oh, good. Oh, he's pitching today.
There we go.
In Colorado.
In Colorado, yeah.
So that should work out well.
Woo!
Maybe his stuff moves more in the thin air versus less like most pitchers. We're going to see. Today's going to be an interesting game. Actually, that game goes on soon here. Yeah. I don't have it in front of me, but I think it's what time is it? 12? Something?
Late. Yep.
So, anyways, I digress. Well, anyways, we'll circle back. I'm going to be traveling over the weekend, but I should have some availability next week. Maybe we'll circle back on Monday just to take tally of what happened over the weekend with the White Sox. I'm sure something interesting will happen. Maybe there'll be like a big brawl or something fun like that.
We can only hope.
Who knows? Anyways, until then, everybody, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.
Peace.